coming today. We really appreciate this. The goal behind this event was to introduce ourselves to the local community. We just turned 3 years old last week, actually. So we're still fairly new, and we know that a lot of those in the local area don't even know that we exist. So Rare New England, we are a patient advocacy organization. We are here to educate and provide support and highlight resources that can help patients, families, and providers and others working with the rare disease community. Today we're going to hear several different perspectives. We're going to hear from a patient, we're going to hear from a clinical geneticist, we're going to hear from a state representative, a senator, and of course Congressman Joe Kennedy, who will be coming, and we'll also hear from a farmer perspective. Just so that you know, anyone with these name tags, these are people who are involved in R&E, board members or committee members, so if you have any questions after we're talking, please come up and ask. We'll answer any questions that we can. Please, refreshments, we don't want anything left when you leave, so please get up at any time. As you know, this is being recorded, so I just ask that you do be mindful of walking in front of the camera or any chatter, because it might be picked up. Just so you know, restrooms are behind us. There's also one down the hall if you need it. And I think that's probably about all I need to say at this point. I will be back towards the end, but for now, I'm going to leave this to Lisa Deck, who is one of our committee members. She is an amazing patient advocate for people with rare diseases, and I'm going to let you hear her story. Thank you.
Hi everybody, how you doing today? Awesome, thank you all for coming, and thank you Rare New England for having me here to speak today. I tell my story many times, but I want to briefly tell it to you and tell you why I'm here. And today I have about 3 reasons to be here. First, I'm local. I live in North Attleboro, just a few miles down the road. So this is my community, this is my space, and I love North Attleboro, I love our community. So I'm here because of that. Secondly, I am here because I am a rare disease patient. And that's what I want to tell you about. And third, I am a committee member and a volunteer for Rare New England. So I give some of my time to Rare New England because what they're doing is amazing. They are trying to raise the voices of rare disease patients and help build a community and find treatments and cures. So I have 3 reasons to be here, and I'm going to briefly tell you my story. So it's 1997, long time ago, actually 22 years ago on Tuesday, and my side goes numb. I'm a 21-year-old college student about to graduate, and my whole side goes numb. I have a severe headache. I have confusion. I don't know what's going on. I feel terrible, and I decide I should go to the hospital. So I go to a local community hospital, and they sent me home. They said it was stress. You're stressed. You just go home and rest. And in a couple days, if you need to call a neurologist, go ahead. Maybe they can help you. Very, very disregarding, and I didn't know any better. I was a patient, a new patient, and I had no idea what to do as a 21-year-old. So I went home, and I laid in my basement for a couple days, and I waited. And finally, the pain got so bad. My headache got worse. My lips started drooping. I had confusion. I was having some trouble speaking. And finally, I'm calling my mom in Rhode Island. I was in D.C., and I'm like, what do I do? She said, go to the hospital. So I went to Georgetown University Hospital, and shocking of shocks, I had had a stroke at 21 years old. And I didn't know that young people could have strokes. I truly didn't. I was sitting in the waiting room, and there was a sign that said, May is Stroke Awareness Month. And it had all the symptoms, and I was checking them off, still thinking, this can't be me. That's older grandparents, not me. So anyway, I had a first stroke. I was treated. I got out for graduation. I walked across the stage. I don't really remember it, but I did. And I started a new job that September. And with that job, you had 6 weeks of training. My first day on the client side, I was so excited. I'm starting my future. I had a second stroke. I had the same symptoms. The doctor rudely told me to get to the hospital. I was like, I'm fine. And I left my bag thinking I was going to come back. Nope, I didn't come back. I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, and they eventually diagnosed me by eliminating causes, but they diagnosed me with vasculitis. What I learned then is vasculitis to be treated was very intense. I went through chemotherapy. I went through prednisone, which is an intense steroid, and I was on blood thinners for 4 years. Nowadays, people on Cytoxan are on it for max 4 months. So very debilitating, very trying time in my life. While tapering the medication, I had a third stroke. This is just crazy at this point. I decided I needed to move home. I need to take care of myself. The doctors took me out of work, and I became disabled, and I moved home to Rhode Island with my family. Eventually, in that time, I recovered. The fortunate thing, at this point, I had relearned to get some of my ability to walk. I had relearned how to, be strong, because I slept for months, and I had nausea, and I had osteopenia, and I had tons of side effects. So in all this time, very trying, but I was alive, I was well. And so I wanted to throw a party. So I decided to throw a party, a celebration of life. And in doing that, I started my volunteerism. I couldn't work, but I wanted to give back. So I, over those years, became a volunteer with the American Heart and American Stroke Association. This lasted for the better part of 14 years. Eventually, I moved to Massachusetts. I got married. I built my family. So we have a family of 4 now. And at this point, I'm a national spokesperson for Go Red for Women for the American Heart Association. This is in 2015. This is as good as you can get in the volunteer world. You're giving your time, and they're like, hey, let's share your story. And that was excellent, because I felt like people were learning about stroke. They were learning that it doesn't discriminate. It can be anybody. So at that point, things are great, and soon we're not great. And this is where I get to the rare disease. In March of 2015, so 4 years ago, again, my side went numb. I rested. It didn't go away. I finally took my own advice and went to the hospital. I had a 4th stroke. And this rocked my world, because now I'm a mom of 2. I had a 6 and 8-year-old, and I'm like, what does this mean? And of course, all those fears come back. Oh boy, I have the disease again. What if this is the big one? I mean, they are all major strokes, but what if this is the one that prevents me from speaking or moving or dying? And fortunately, the doctors, said I was okay, but they said we need to do some testing. And I had to wait for a specific neurointerventional radiologist. Say that 5 times fast. So I waited for him, and come to find out that was very important, because when I went for that testing, I walked into the hospital with my yellow films. Remember those from a long time ago? And I handed them to him. He goes, wow, I haven't seen these in a long time. And he looked at my films, and he realized that he thought I did not have vasculitis. And I'm about to go into this test, and he said, I don't think you have vasculitis. Now, this is my identity for 14 years. This is what I've been treated for. I'm shocked. Come to find out, this neurointerventional radiologist did his residency at Stanford University at the Moya Moya Center. Guess what I have? Moya Moya disease. This introduced me to the world of rare disease. This introduced me to the fact that rare disease patients have such a diagnostic odyssey. I waited 14 years to get that correct diagnosis. And of course, Moya Moya does not have a cure, but it has treatment. Okay, I'll do the treatment, brain surgery. And it wasn't just one brain surgery, it was 2. So I learned that they would need to do a bypass surgery on both sides of my brain, because there was a deficit of blood flow, which is why I was continually having strokes. And they said, if you don't do the surgery, you might have another stroke. So we dove in, and this is another factor I'll talk about in a minute, but is luckily I was an experienced patient. I knew how to advocate for myself. I knew how to do the research. I knew how to take notes. I knew how to take medicine. I was at a point where I could do what I needed to do. And I look at so many rare disease patients who don't have that. I don't wish that they have another experience, but I kind of went in with my eyes wide open of what I needed to do. So we did the research. I interviewed neurosurgeons. I looked at the statistics. I looked at the life expectancy after the surgeries. And we made the decision to go to Stanford, to the Moya Moya Center, to have surgeries. And I often graze through this part of the story because the details are kind of too debilitating and sad, but I had 2 brain surgeries, 2 major brain surgeries, where they take a vessel, they move it, reattach it to the other vessel, and then they harvest the other one and lay it on top of your scalp to increase blood flow. 10 hours and 9 hours were the 2 surgeries, a week apart. They froze me so they could move these vessels, but in the end, I'm okay, and that's why I'm here. I did have speech issues. I came out and they told me to say no ifs, ands, or buts. And I would say ifs, no, ands, buts. And I'd look at my husband, he'd be like, no. And so but what I thought I was saying was not coming out. So I experienced what many stroke survivors experience. So since then, it's been 4 years, and I had a long recovery. And it wasn't a physical recovery, but I would say the emotional toll was even worse. And I look back and I think I'm finally coming out of that. I think probably a good 2 years of fighting that anxiety and panic attacks and even a little PTSD and realizing that my kids were still going to be here. I'm not going anywhere. Knock on wood. So, it took a lot of that. And why do I share this all with you? No, it's a good story. No, I'm just kidding. I tell you this because I'm unique in my story, but I'm not unique for rare disease patients. I have since become involved in the rare disease world, and I volunteer with Rare New England, and Moya Moya, we're starting a foundation, not me, but someone's starting a foundation for Moya Moya. So I'm diving into that now because it's what I can do. And I don't want people to have to go through what I did. 14 years without a diagnosis, it was okay for me, but that's not fair. And there's so many children, there's so many people. So what I tell you is so many rare disease patients, 1, have trouble with a diagnosis. 2, have trouble making decisions and really figuring out what to do and getting that treatment. And 3, altering their life. I don't like to do it, but if I think back, and if when I was 21, they diagnosed me and I had the surgeries then, my life would look very different. My hardest times have been my best times because I am here today. So I can't take that away. And I think that's something, 1, I want to educate you about rare disease, but 2, realize on those deep days where you're down and you're tired and you're upset, sometimes those teach you the most things you need to learn in life. So thank you for listening to me. Now I'm going to pass it to the next speaker.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm always amazed with Lisa. She tells her story so well. And I might embarrass her, but I'm also going to tell you that the American Heart Association sent her to Japan last month. That's how good she is. And we are so lucky to have her here with us, with Rare New England. So next on the agenda, we're going to hear from a clinical geneticist who can share his perspective on, what's happening with these patients. Why is it so difficult for them to get diagnoses and whatever else he would like to add. He is a founding board member with Rare New England, and he's been amazing for the organization. Dr. Mark Corson.
Thank you very much, and good morning. So as Julie said, I'm a metabolic or biochemical geneticist. So those genetic disorders are inherited disorders that have some sort of chemical imbalance that causes their symptoms. Trained as a pediatrician, and I helped to found Rare New England. So Rare New England doesn't just take care of genetic disorders, but there's over 7,000 rare diseases, and many of them are genetic or metabolic. So many would say that the future of medicine is genetics, that genetics dictates very much how we live life, how we encounter life, how disease affects us, how we react to medications, how all kinds of these aspects of living and dealing with life. And yet, genetics is in a bit of a dire situation. So my professional focus, again, is biochemical genetics. Again, if genetics includes patients that have unusual physical features or patients who have problems in genes that predispose them to cancer, my area of genetics is metabolic. So some sort of chemical imbalance. There's only about, there's probably about 1,500 or 1,600 metabolic disorders. But there's only 120 to 140 metabolic physicians in the United States. About 50% of the metabolic clinics in North America are run by physicians who have no formal training in this area because there's no one else. So they're doing this work. People who are not trained are doing this work out of institutional need because of circumstance. Newborn screening, which is a test that is done before every newborn leaves the newborn nursery. It's a little heel stick, and a little blood specimen is collected. Every newborn in the United States has some blood sent for a newborn screen, which can screen for over 50 different metabolic disorders. About 1,500 patients are identified per year and pumped into the system, but there's no increase in the number of physicians to see them. So this is creating a pretty significant problem for patients because if there's not enough physicians, who's going to take care of them? If physicians are running around, if patients are running around with symptoms and they can't access treatment if they don't have a diagnosis. I mean, consider Lisa's story. It's also posing a problem for physicians. If physicians are being burdened with more and more patients to see, how are they able to conduct their practice of medicine? And it's even interfering with the pharmaceutical industry. So I was at a Boston Business Journal power breakfast about 3-4 years ago, and they're talking about gene therapy, the future of gene therapy and genetics, and isn't this going to be an important entrepreneurial journey? And this is going to help patients, and it's going to be a source of revenue. And so there is somebody there representing, a major pharmaceutical company that's well known, somebody representing a startup, and somebody representing a venture capital firm. And the person representing the venture capital firm stood up and said, the major obstacle to companies making money in this area of medicine is not the cost of research, and development. It's not the FDA and the costs of getting drugs approved. It's the fact that these patients are simply not identified. And if you don't identify the patients, you can't provide them the product, you can't make money. So this is a pervasive problem in this society, that we have these disorders that are increasingly well known, that are even there are even treatments, but we simply don't have enough providers in this area. And there's actually very few organizations that are taking this seriously, and I'm very proud to say that Rare New England is one of them. And we've instituted in New England a Rare Disease Day speaker series. Rare Disease Day is February 28th. And so during, on that day or in that season, RNE brings patients with rare disease to speak to medical audiences around Rare New England. And this year we appeared in all 6 New England states and presented at 9 different sites. And we have, we're asked back to do this again next year. We're actually approaching now the American College of Medical Genetics and the Society for Inherited Metabolic Disease to sponsor this on a national basis and go beyond here. So, but the idea started here with RNE. The other thing we're doing is we're developing the concept of career fairs in genetics, where approaching medical students and young trainees, young professional trainees, to consider a career in genetics because of its promise for the future of medicine. And so we did our first at Mass General Hospital and at Boston Medical Center, and we're getting people who are interested, who are coming forward and want to go the next step. I want to talk to somebody. I want to see, who can I see patients with? Who can I talk to and do a project with? So I think we're coming up with some good ideas here. But and if anyone has any suggestions for how to advance our mission, please let us know. Thank you.
It was 1 minute out.
Do you want him to go? Switch?
Yeah. Why don't we do it? Yeah, good idea. Good idea. Good thinking. Okay, so we're waiting for Congressman Kennedy, he is on his way. His aide is here. She just showed me. Let's hear from the pharma perspective. We have a founding board member, pharma veteran, I would call him, and he can offer a lot of perspective on the pharma level and the idea of, okay, well, why don't these patients have treatments and why don't they have cures? And I'm sure he can offer more than this. So I'd like to introduce John Campbell.
Thank you very much, Julie. It's a privilege to be here. I'm very glad I don't have to speak after Congressman Kennedy. The first thing I want to do is negate something that Mark said, that it's not about the resources needed to develop drugs, because what Mark says is true. Certainly, it is difficult to find the patients in many of these rare diseases, and I think Lisa's story was a good example of that. I'm a clinical development director at a large pharma company, and I'm an RNE board member. So the RNE board member role sort of keeps me sane from my daily job, because it is very difficult in drug development for many reasons. And in rare disease, it's even harder. We've all heard the numbers. It's $1 billion. It's 10 years to develop a drug. 1 in 10 make it from start to finish. So it's risky. There's a lot of competition out there. In 10 years, a lot of things can change. You can go and put your application to the FDA, and they can say, yeah, well done, but no, which kind of really is not good. So it takes really a lot of effort to put this forward, and a lot of money. $1 billion, I can't even fathom that, but it's a whole lot. And what it takes to do it really is a village. It's not just the pharma companies, it's the legislators who are committed to making sure that the voice of the patient is heard, and there's fairness with respect to the laws and reimbursement and things. It takes providers. What Dr. Corson talked about is the education of the providers. Lisa's story is an example of this too, that there's too few specialists in a lot of these rare disease areas, and a lot of these diseases get overlooked, which is a shame. So education is important. Technology is advancing at a rapid rate. The things that we can do today to identify drug targets and put a lot of stuff into the clinical trial funnel is just expanding exponentially. But unfortunately, that's not really translating into an increase in the number of drugs that are approved from the clinical trial process. There's a lot of reasons for that. Again, money is one of them, but it's also it involves some of the other village members, such as the FDA. The FDA is evolving with respect to its position on rare disease. Reviewing a drug application for a rare disease is a lot different than reviewing an application for a more common disease. One of the differences really is this benefit-risk sort of equation. And if you think about it, the benefit-risk from the FDA's perspective, they are legally bound to protect public health. So that's population-wide. That's a lot different than the provider's assessment of risk-benefit. But most importantly, it's different than the patient's concept of risk-benefit. And many times in rare disease, particularly in lethal disease, patients are more than willing to accept some risk in order to gain potential benefit. So I think I wanted to give you that flavor. There is bright spots. This technology is moving forward. There's a group at NIH called the National Center for Advancing Translational Sciences. And this is a group that's looking at the technology of clinical trials and making it more efficient and helping the FDA evolve further in this area. So I thank you all again for the commitment. There's industry folks here, there's legislators here, and on behalf of R&E, thank you very much.
Okay, now I'm very pleased to be able to introduce you to the next speaker. He's someone, I don't know if anyone who's actually heard him speak, but I have, and it's when it comes to the people and facing adversity, I just feel like he shows so much passion. I hear the passion in his voice. One of his main issues would be healthcare, and I have heard him fighting for more affordable healthcare for patients and families. Also, a couple of years ago, I was in his office and I asked him to join the Rare Disease Caucus. like 2 days tops, I got an email that was all set, that he had joined. So I'm very thankful for that, and I'd like to introduce you now to Congressman Joseph Kennedy III.
How about that? Julie, thank you. Grateful for the introduction. Thank you for the invitation to be here. Senator, always a pleasure to be with you as well, sir. Thank you. Thank you for what you do. And other colleagues from the Mass delegation. Thank you guys for being here as well. Folks, honored to be here, and more than anything else, I just want to say thank you. The challenges that so many families across our Commonwealth, across our country face, for those that are struggling. I have a family member struggling with rare disease. It is one of the things that I've come to know and appreciate and to learn is this is not an issue that affects a single patient. This affects the entire family. It affects a family in terms of the ability for their loved ones to provide the care that's necessary. It affects a family clearly in terms of the financial burden that oftentimes comes down on family members. And without the robust federal understanding, support, structures, incentives, and protections put in place, it's one that all too often ends up with family members having to choose between how you care for one loved one versus another one. And that's not the burden that the wealthiest, most successful nation on the planet should be putting on families because somebody's sick. My responsibility, and I think all of us in Congress, need to try to find a way, one, to ensure the proper structures and incentives to make sure we continue to innovate so that we find cures for these conditions and these diseases. And that's not just mitigating the symptoms, but actually curing the underlying illness. That we recognize then that as those cures are developed, that the time, the complexity, the cost that is associated with them, that does not lead to cost structures that then put those medicines out of reach for so many families. Though I've talked to many families that have said the only thing worse than knowing that there is no cure for my child is knowing that there is, but I can't afford it. That cannot be acceptable today in this country. 3 is making sure that for the millions of Americans that are unaware about how this system operates, the burden that it puts on those families, the ineffectiveness of some of the structures and incentives put in place, that we do a better job educating them and continuing to push Congress to make the adjustments that are necessary to spur that innovation, but then to ensure that every single patient has the access to the care that they need when they need it at a price that they can afford. Your efforts and your advocacy, the ways in which you have elevated these issues and the circumstances that how they affect your families and families of those that you care about, families of those that you represent, have been critically important as one to me, as I've learned about these issues. 2, as Congress does, and I do believe we will, finally start to wrestle with issues around costs of prescription drugs, that we make sure we get this right. Because we have a duty and obligation, as I said, 1, to make sure that everybody across this country gets access to the medication that they need when they need it at a price that they can afford. But 2, that we ensure that that innovation continues so that we can continue to make progress on these conditions. We have a chance in Congress to actually restructure this field. And we'll be looking to you to make sure that as we do so, that we keep the focus on the patients and their families and make sure we do this right. Grateful for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for making sure all of these voices continue to be elevated. And thank you for fighting for so many families across the country. I'm grateful. Of course.
Lois.
What happened?
Broke metatarsal, fifth metatarsal.
That's not rare.
I know.
My wife was in one of those for, yeah.
Yes.
It's been yeah, thank you. 1, 2. Thank you. Do one more.
She slipped on ice taking out the trash.
You want me to do it?
Yeah.
Moving to California, she never taking out the trash.
And actually, when
She
we
learned
decided
her lesson.
if the senator and Representative McKenna would come up as well.
Good to see you.
Move that over.
Get us out
Yeah.
Fine.
I don't know.
Where
Where do you want us to
Look at
be?
you first.
Look at you?
Okay.
Okay, you're looking
Maybe
at me.
we'll move around. Yeah.
I can do a couple more.
Thank you, guys. Excellent.
And can I just get one?
She's like, and now me. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, now, I guess.
Are we gonna move that back?
Okay, so, now I'm going to talk a little bit about a bill, share about a bill that we've been working on for over 4 years now, called an Act to Create a Rare Disease Advisory Council, and that's in Massachusetts. We did have a representative behind this bill for a few years, but he is now the mayor of Attleboro, so he couldn't do this anymore. So I needed to go out last fall and find other representatives, somebody to sponsor this bill. Fortunately, I was very lucky to find two very eager, gung-ho, let's get this bill passed representatives. One is Representative Hannah Kane. Unfortunately, she was not able to make it here today, but we are very fortunate that we do have Representative Joe McKenna, and I would like to introduce him to you now so that he could share his story. And he has a little background himself that he can share about rare diseases and to share just a little bit about this bill and what we're trying to do.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here with the congressman. I've heard a rumor that his comes from a political family, and I don't know about the last name, but doesn't he have a hell of a good first name in politics?
Thank you.
So as Julie says, I was a co-sponsor on Representative Haru's Rare Disease Advisory Bill 2 terms ago. And at the time, it was one of the 7,000 or so bills that gets filed, and you add your name to the ones you can, and it's kind of a drinking out of a water hose situation where you're getting emails from everyone about all of the legislation in Mass and trying to get involved. And so as a co-sponsor, I said, you know, I've got some rare disease history, and yeah, I'll get involved and I'll co-sponsor that, and if there's an opportunity, maybe I can add my voice. And then the email came through at the end of the session when we knew that Paul was not going to return to the legislature, and Julie was asking for people to take the lead. And it was a very easy decision to make, to say, you know what, I'm happy to take that role on. And the reason I felt that way is because I'm very connected to the hemophilia community. My father was someone who had hemophilia, and he has 2 sisters who are carriers, and so my 2 cousins have hemophilia, their 2 sons, and my own sister became a carrier, and so now I have a 10-month-old nephew with hemophilia. So we've got hemophilia throughout my family, and in the early 80s, when my dad had hemophilia, he was actually in a pretty severe car accident and was in the hospital and needed significant blood transfusions. And as part of that situation back in the 80s with the blood transfusions, he was one of a whole generation of hemophilia sufferers who was tainted with transfused with tainted blood. So he became HIV positive and eventually contracted AIDS and passed away. The good side of the story is that he had a problem flirting with his attending nurse when he was in the hospital, and went on to marry that nurse, who is my mom. So here I am today because of that story. So there's a silver lining to everything. But so growing up, I saw my dad going through the struggles of suffering from hemophilia and AIDS at the time, and it very much was a developing treatment, and it wasn't where it is today. Now I have the fortune of talking with my sister and seeing the care that her son, my nephew, gets, and it's worlds and worlds ahead from where we were 10, 15 years ago. And for me, looking into the rare disease community and realizing that there's 7,000 plus individual rare diseases, all who are going through the exact same struggle of trying to educate doctors who may not know. And so my sister's out in northern rural Wisconsin, where there's not a high hemophilia population. So she has to educate her son's teachers about, he can't play like all the other kids because he might have a bleed. And just the day-to-day struggles that those who suffer from hemophilia have. And I started thinking, and I say this very delicately, but you look at situations like the Alzheimer's community and some of the cancer communities that have nationwide drives and fundraising efforts, and they sponsor, baseball stadiums, and everyone knows about them. And my own grandmother was someone who suffered from Alzheimer's, so I have a tremendous respect for that. But you all have the same struggle, and there's no nationwide walk for Maya disease that I know of. There's no nationwide walk for all of these very, very ultra rare diseases. And so that's what this legislation kind of seeks to do, is to take all the efforts, all the energy, all the passion that you all have as individuals suffering from a rare disease or supporting family with rare disease, and put that together so that we have a unified community that can fight together, that can take limited resources and make it go further, that can really spread awareness among the legislators so that when there's price control issues with prescriptions, we understand the implications that has. So this is really a bill that's seeking to raise awareness, to educate the general public about the breadth and the depth of the rare disease community and how much more is out there than people may realize. So we're really starting to build some strong momentum, and in no small part to Julie's tireless passion and leadership, bringing everyone together and consistently advocating on Beacon Hill in Washington and other places. So I'm happy to play a small role in that and try to build momentum, and hopefully we'll have some positive results in the Mass Legislature. So I'm happy to be here.
Could you take 1 second to plug May 14th?
Absolutely. So on May 14th, there's an advocacy day in Boston at Beacon Hill. And the purpose of that advocacy day is to bring people to Beacon Hill to hear from a couple of experts and stakeholders. But then the real importance is to get out into the State House, into the building, and to talk to representatives, to senators, and I will say to their aides, because you may not always get to talk to the rep or the senator, and as someone who was a former aide, we are important too. So don't feel if you're having a conversation with an aide because the rep or the senator is tied up. That's a very important conversation as well. And it's simply to raise that awareness and to make sure that this bill is something that when it comes across a committee hearing, someone sitting on that committee will say, "Oh, I had a conversation with Lisa." That really matters. And more than getting a block email or just hearing about something in the press, hearing a personal story, hearing about your child or an individual who has a rare disease and the impact that it has, that makes such a tremendous difference to all of us legislators. So getting out, sharing your personal story, and taking the time is really important and really helps to build that momentum.
Okay, and then the story went on. We were also trying to bring this rare disease bill in from the Senate side. We did have someone that was from my town who was going to take on this bill from the Senate side, and unfortunately, he was not reelected. So that left us with, okay, what do we do? And I was really so busy with everything, like the Rare Disease Day Speaker Series that we were putting on. I didn't have a lot of attention for this. But in the meantime, as we are now collaborating with NORD with this bill, they're trying to help us as well with this bill and providing support and making the connections. They actually had an event, and it was at the State House, and they had some people go around and share about the bill and share about rare disease. And I guess they ended up in Senator Feeney's office. So I found out afterwards, I wasn't able to be there that day. I found out afterwards that he was agreeable, and he seems to understand what's going on with the rare disease community, and he and his office are gung-ho on getting this this bill pass. And the most interesting thing I think about this and finding the senator is he's actually in the district of the Rare New England office. So this is really awesome, and I would like to introduce you now to Senator Keeney so that he can.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Julie and R&E, for the work that you do. Thank you so much, Representative McKenna, for taking the lead on this and for sharing your story. And Congressman Kennedy, how blessed are we to have Congressman Joe Kennedy represent us here in this district, who does so much with healthcare across this country, really with people in mind, understanding that we can be wonky at times and we can talk about policy, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's about sticking up for people. And Congressman Kennedy has done that his entire career, and we're blessed to have him with us. I just want to say thank you, number one. Thank you to Julie, to Rare New England. I do apologize if my voice cracks or I'm partaking in the great New England tradition of allergy season, so a little watery. And I just wanted to come by and say, number one, thank you. Thank you for the strength, Lisa, your story. Thank you for sharing that. It's incredible the amount of people that you meet when you get involved in a bill like this that just, completely blow your mind on a daily basis. As a legislator, sometimes, we go into the building and we think we have all the answers and we're going to file these bills and these bills. And as a representative said, with over 7,000 bills filed, certainly not everything is on your radar screen at all times. So you rely on your constituents. You rely on advocates. You rely on people telling their stories. And that's what happened with me. When I was in there, we were having meetings, as my normal day in the State House, meeting after meeting after meeting, talking about different pieces of legislation, how we can help the district, how we can help the Commonwealth. And a couple of people stopped at my office, just happened to be my next meeting, and they started talking about the rare disease community. And at the end of the meeting, I'll skip to the end because this was powerful for me. The advocate that was there, the woman who was there telling me the story of her family, instead of handing me a business card, which is the way most of my meetings end, she handed me a photo of her son. She handed me the photo of her son whose story she just told to me. And she told me of struggle, she told me of hope, she told me of difficulties and roadblocks and obstacles, but she told me how her family was overcoming them. And I understood at that moment that she had the playbook for her loved one and for her family. But so many across this state and across this country don't have that playbook. Now, I come from Foxborough, so I can use football analogies. But could you imagine if the Patriots took the field without the playbook? They wouldn't be successful. And it's important that we have advocates and people that have been through it and people that know how to network and deal with the doctors that they have to deal with and pharmaceutical companies and sometimes the bureaucratic red tape that we face, especially here in the Commonwealth, to give that playbook to the next person, to leave that ladder down for the next family. And how important is it that we have Rare New England and the work that Julie does and the board with voices of the pharmaceutical industry and doctors and practitioners and folks that know how to deal with insurance. How important is it that we continue to pay that forward, to give that playbook to the next people? And that's what this is about. It's about elevating those voices, as the congressman said. It's about giving the patients a voice at the table. And if there's not enough seats at the table, as our Senate President has been known to say, we'll get a bigger table. And that's what this bill is that Representative McKenna and myself are advocating for, and that you're advocating for, to make sure that we're listening, that we're lifting people up, that we're giving hope to people that all too often face obstacles and roadblocks. Look, I think, and maybe some people don't agree with me, that I think our healthcare system across this country is broken. And I think we have a long way to go to fix it. I do. But I haven't lost hope because I know that when people come together, and this comes from my background as an organizer, that when people come together, you can make change. I said last night at an event, and I've been known to say it a few times, that a movement is made up of a series of moments. And I think we need a movement across this country for healthcare. I think we need a movement for those that are suffering from rare disease, for those that are taking care of their loved ones with rare and complex disorders. But if a movement is made up of a series of moments, we have to recognize that it's moments like this on a Friday morning with our congressmen, representatives, legislators, advocates, patients, doctors, pharmaceutical companies, people from the community. It's moments like this when we come together to talk about these issues, to educate, to advocate, moments like we're going to have on May 14th at the State House, moments like you have each and every day, even in frustration, when you figure out how to advocate and how to help each other and lift each other up. It's those moments that are going to lead to a movement across this country. And I encourage you and urge you, I beg you, and I plead, please continue to do what you're doing. You're making a difference. You've made a difference, certainly in the way I legislate. When I came and sat with Julie a couple weeks ago, and we continued that conversation and those stories of people that are suffering from rare disease and complex disorders. And I started to think about the people, my own constituents in my district, that are suffering. Suffering not just because of their lot in life or because of the disease that they've been diagnosed with, understanding that the disease or the disorder does not define them, but suffering because they're looking for that playbook. Because they want to be taken care of, they want to take care of their loved ones, they want to be patients that have a support system around them. Not simply advocates that spend hours and hours on the phone or traveling across the state going to different providers. That's what's important for us to get to. I encourage you to keep up the work. You're doing God's work. I'm thrilled to be here with you today, and I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you so
Okay, now I'd just like to take 2 minutes to share about what Rare New England is doing. I think we've learned, and I know some of you are well versed in the rare disease community and what's going on. Some of you may know some of you I know are brand new to the rare disease community. So I hope that you have learned today what's going on in the rare disease community and why the rare disease community needs you and needs help. I'd like to share a little bit about what R&E is doing for 2 minutes, and then I'd like to open up, and if anybody has any questions for anyone, then we can go from there. But R&E, as you can see, legislation, I don't think I need to talk about that. You see what we're doing in the legislative efforts. We also have 4 other programs. I know Dr. Corson has shared a little bit about what we are doing with the career fairs and the Rare Disease Speaker Series, Rare Disease Day Speaker Series, where this is more educating the health professionals who are dealing with patients who may not recognize these patients. And I have to say, being involved in that has been incredible to me, because when you're there and you see doctors and other healthcare professionals sitting there and learning about these diseases, knowing they may never see the disease that is introduced at the time, that the overview is provided for, but hopefully giving them the idea that, maybe the person sitting in front of me who has a complicated illness needs more of my attention. Maybe I need to go another step further to find out what's going on with this patient, because way too many patients are actually just being discarded. The physicians don't understand. And of course, the healthcare system today is very, very difficult. There's just too much to do for any physician, for any nurse. I mean, these hospitals are just, things, they go in circles, they go, spinning all the time. So it's hard, and it's hard to learn new things. And no physician can be expected to know all the chronic diseases plus 7,000 rare diseases. I mean, that's impossible. But if we can at least help them to understand that maybe this patient in front of you has something beyond, so that they can take the next step and help that patient. They should never say to that patient, gee, you're fine, you look fine. I mean, this is what happens a lot of times. I see people shaking their heads. They understand what I'm talking about. That's never a good thing to say to a patient who doesn't feel well. So with that said, I know Dr. Corson did share about the career fairs and the Rare Disease Day Speaker Series, so I'm not going to go into that, but we also have the annual conferences. So we go around into a different state of New England, and we bring across-the-board information. So it may be on genetic testing, it may be on clinical trials, what are they? How do you find them for your disease? How do you understand them? Advocating for your child, working with the school, across the board. Nothing specific on a specific disease, but something that can help anyone who comes to these conferences. We also have what's called the World of Rare Disease. And this is a cable show out of Mansfield Cable, who is kind enough, recognized what we were doing and asked us if we wanted to have a show. And actually, this here is our set. They made it as a wonderful set. You can see the zebra print in the background for rare disease. And we go there and we record something once per month. We try to bring in education. You're still following our mission, the education, the information, highlighting resources. So, for example, we've had a psychiatrist who has come in he has experience working with patients with complex rare conditions. So he came in and talked about depression and anxiety in the rare disease patient. We've had Team Impact come in, who is an organization who matches complex care kids with sports, local sports teams. That's the idea. So all of that, once we get the recordings, goes on our website, and it's available to anyone. So it's, we're trying to get the word out for that so that people can learn more about what's going on, and we'll continue to bring in more information. So these are the pieces that RNE is working on and trying to accomplish. So I think, I do want to thank everyone for being here. I really appreciate everyone being here today and listening to the story about rare disease and listening about RNE. And if anything, when you leave, it's not about RNE. That's the thing. That can go to the side. Yes, we need help. Yes, we need funding. Yes, we need, manpower. Yes. But the point I want you to leave here with is to recognize the rare disease community. One of the analogies that I use is, think of the word cancer. I say that split seconds it goes through your brain what that person might be going through if they have cancer. You know about the financial issues they might be having. You know that they might die. You know that they may be afraid they're going to die or their child's going to die. And there could be chemotherapy, radiation, some of the treatments. But some of these rare diseases you can't even pronounce. And we need, so that if we say that someone has a rare disease, we want it to be that person you're saying that to understand the difficulty and recognizes what that patient and that family is going through. So if anything, I hope you leave with that today. So with that, I'm going to sign off, and I'll open up if anyone has any questions for anyone, any of us. We have a little bit more time. Thank you, everyone.